Hello and welcome to ClockTower Game Studios.
She beat me to it. Yeah, hello, welcome. So first order of business, we finally got the thrilling conclusion to our painting competition for the...
Yeah, it was tied for like a week and a half.
So,
for shame.
Yeah. So as of filming of this, it ended up my female model came out ahead by 1 vote. And then my male model won by a little bit more of a margin, but even so, it was still a pretty big, or pretty close race in both models. So
yeah, but we also got to reveal who designed each model, since that was a vote as well.
That's true.
Because we kept that under wraps.
So here are the models you painted, and here are the models I painted. So the funny thing is y'all selected the models we designed of each other, so...
And not the ones we designed of ourselves.
Yeah, so the model that is me is the one she designed, and I gotta say, I love the crow and hammer. Anybody that knows me, yeah, that's spot on.
And I was going for kind of a mashup of D&D and cyberpunk styles, so I kind of tried to keep it a little bit of both without being too blatantly mashed.
Yeah. And then the female models, this is the one I designed of her. I kind of was going for sort of a near future post-apocalyptic sort of type thing. So she really enjoys archery and is good at it. So I went with the bow. And
I used to be.
Well, I mean, we all have to move on at some point. But of course our cat Taco is on this one. And then I decided she needed to be a Disney princess with a squirrel. So...
Except for only one of us painted Taco.
Yeah, I painted some other random cat. I ran out of time. What are you gonna do?
Right.
So, personal choices. I think that the male model is a toss-up. That's just a matter of preference. Overall paint quality, I think mine's a little smoother on the light colors. But I think her color palette is way better, so I think that one's a toss-up in my book.
Also have been trying to work our way through some old paints, so you gotta battle with the old expired paints.
Yeah, there's a couple of my older Citadel paints that have gotten a little bit clumpy and grainy, and they make it really hard to get a good smooth coat of paint on sometimes, so it takes a little extra effort. And with the time limit, that kind of put a crunch on some of them. Female models, mine won, but honestly, I disagree with all of you. I think that her model come out looking smoother, the color palette's warmer and just looks better, especially on camera. My model just looked like a zombie a little bit because I went with so many cool colors, and then the skin tone doesn't match from her upper body to the legs. I think mine actually is a train wreck, but hers, the colors are all smooth. It's a warmer looking model. I honestly, and of course Taco looks like Taco on hers. So I personally think hers won. That's my opinion. But I didn't get to vote, so.
The best part is, on my model at least, we both painted clothes I actually have. Whereas this one was just clothes we thought we could see him in.
Yeah. It definitely was, the clothing chosen for her model, both of our paint schemes, is seriously stuff straight out of her wardrobe, like for real. And the skirt actually that I painted, she made, so.
And the one I painted, I got at a street fair in Seattle.
Yeah. So thank you guys very much for voting. It was a lot of fun to do this. I know at least one other person that we know in the local community has gone out and made a model of himself since seeing this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the whole thing as much as we did. And I think with that, we're ready to, if you want to dip out, I'll go ahead and get the actual episode introduced.
You got it.
Thank you very much for playing along.
Round of applause.
All right, guys, be sure to thank Callie in the comments section for her participation. That whole project was a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. So with that, this week's project ran a little long because I am a sucker for detail and extra effort. And, you know, sometimes project creep is part of the whole thing and part of the fun. And I know other YouTubers that crank through their projects anyway, just so they have a full project on video. And as you've probably noticed over the course of the videos I've been making for the channel, if mine go long, I break them up. And this has turned into almost more of a hobby blog as much as it is like a tutorial channel. So I don't regret that decision. I still think it's good for the game community and for our company's image because it lets you guys see behind the scenes a little bit what we're doing. It helps show that you can, with a little time and effort, build all the same scenery and stuff that looks just as good as what we were doing. It just takes a little time, but it doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot of money. So with that, let's introduce this week's project. So for my Neo Nagoya build, I've decided I'm going to build a footbridge that goes across the streets. And my idea and inspiration for this is a traditional Japanese red and white bridge that you see in like Buddhist parks and stuff. So I have the bridge broken up to where the steps are magnetized and come off. They still need some finishing touches. There's a little more of the woodwork that needs done on the sides of the actual span, but overall, I'm really happy with this build so far. And now, if you guys are ready, let's just dive right into the how-tos and the walkthrough of how I did it. All right, so as I mentioned, today we're going to be working on building a bridge. So my inspiration for the bridge, as you can see from the pictures, is the traditional Japanese red-sided bridges. Of course, this is supposed to be a little bit sci-fi, a little bit tech, and a little bit futuristic, and on an alien planet. So instead of being the traditional wooden construction, this is going to be concrete, and I'm thinking of using a technique to make it appear as though it's wooden bank or has wooden casements or buttresses, supports along the sides and maybe under the bottom. I haven't really decided on how I'm going to do the underside of the bridge just yet, but I know I'm going to texture it somehow and give it a little bit more personality. So the first thing to do is I have some of my materials because I knew everything on my building or on my board is based on 8-inch squares or some multiple of 8 inches. So here I have my two 8-inch bases, and these are going to form the core of my build. So to put that into perspective, this is going to be 8 inches on one side, 8-inch square on the other side, and then in the middle is going to be where the street bed is. Now the way my street beds are set up, it's inch of sidewalks, 6 inches of actual road bed, another sidewalk, and then the space for the board pieces, the terrain pieces on the other sides. So here I'm going to have one side of the bridge, here's the other side. They're going to form an archway and curl up to where they reach up to about here. So my goal is to have this, after the arch is put into it, be high enough to where vehicles can pass under it. I want it to be a realistic, usable bridge that wouldn't impede traffic underneath it. With that in mind, the traffic specifically I'm trying to make sure there's room for is there needs to be room for APCs and tanks. The reason for that is in most cultures, especially since this is based on Japan and Japanese culture, when they are designing their tanks and their battle vehicles, they take their bridges into account, not necessarily the overpasses, but the underpasses and the bridges they have to go over. The reason for that is Japanese is a very mountainous country, lots of river valleys, lots of deep mountain valleys with bridges across them. So they have weight restrictions, they have size restrictions. So they tend to have medium and light tanks that are predominantly their military vehicle of choice, and of course APCs, and everything's built with their bridges in mind, because if you can't move troops and material around your own country and the need for defense, what's the point of having them? You have to be able to defend your country with your vehicles. So with that in mind, this is the vehicle that I've got this sort of based on as being the home vehicle, so to speak. Like this is their home turf. So I need to make sure that the bridge will allow this to pass under it. So with that in mind, I have some preliminary drawings going of what I want the bridge to look like in total. So as you can see, I've got my very rough drawing. Like this was my initial rough scale. It's 4 inches tall in the middle. Each of these squares is 2 inches, so it's 4 inches tall in the middle, and at the very, very edge, it's still a little more than 3 inches. And this on its own is roughly 3¼ inches tall. So we're going to keep that in mind. And here on the back side of this, I have a drawing of what the actual stairs are going to look like. They're going to be around 1/2 inch each and lead up to the base of the stairs where the platform, like the landing, will be that goes across the bridge. And then here, I've gone into a little more detail of those same steps viewed end on instead of from the side in the last picture. And here you can see that would be the landing, this top step. And then each of these steps will go up until the top section will be mostly flat. So I'm gonna put a foam core bend here and here to make the archway. Again, here at the side, there's gonna be another inch. I believe 5 squares equals an inch on this one, so there's an inch. And anyway, where it's actually at, it should be a little more than 3 inches at the very edge, which means under the center of the bridge, you should have room for a vehicle at least. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the bases and do the concrete texturing. If you're interested in how I did the concrete texturing, be sure to check out the link in the top corner of the screen. They'll have, that link will have all the detail how I do all my concrete, which is gonna make up the core of this. Really, this is a combination of a couple things that I've done before and really only one technique I haven't tried before. So when I get to that, I'll detail it in more depth. But for now, let's just get started on the basics and get the core of the construction out of the way. And of course, for the concrete tutorial, you can check out the video link, which will be in the top corner up there. So be sure to check that out if you want to see how exactly I go through doing my concrete textures. Okay, so I have made some templates for my bridge, and I feel like they require a little clarification. So the bridge is going to fit together. This is a side view of the arch. This is the top part of the arch. This is the inner side of the arch. This is the middle line. This will be where it drops off down to the street. So this will all be, including this initial inch, there will be another inch of sidewalk there, and then the street. So this will actually be around 1/8 of an inch deeper than just the middle of the arch. And then the stairs up will be right here. So this is the profile shot of the main span, and I'm simply going to cut these out and use my orange reference lines to mirror them, like so, and glue them onto my foam, which I have pink insulation construction foam. And then this is a profile shot of the steps that lead up to that. So these are going to be identical on either side. So they're going to be like this, glued onto the end of the span. So this ramp will lead up. This will actually be sort of the step up onto the actual span that goes across the street. So first things first, I need to cut out my templates, and then I will show you gluing them onto the foam. This template, again, was in parts. These two are fine as is. This one, though, I've cut out in a couple different ways. So you can see this one, the marks and everything are still intact. This one, they're not quite. So I use that center line, that orange line, to be sort of my guide. And I cut them both out at the same line there. And then I left this part on this side because my thinking is I can line these up by those lines through the paper because they're just a little bit translucent enough to see, and I think they'll stand out better on the pink. So I can make the mirror side of it and stick it down on my pink foam. That's my idea. But first, I need to get a piece of pink foam squared up and true so I can glue the foam to it, or glue the pattern to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up my wire cutter here to make a bit of a rip. So I have clamps and I've got my guide, and I think because of how this sits on the table, I may have to do this off camera and do it kind of at a weird angle. So what I'm going to do though is I'm gonna take this and tighten it down onto this where I can cut like a 5-inch chunk out in a straight square line. So I've got one square straight edge that's a good clean edge to work off of. So I'm gonna do that to where not only is this clamped to this, but to the table, so none of it slips around, and that's where I'm gonna go with that. So I'm gonna do that off camera, because yeah, I can't do it here. So I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, I've cut my piece of foam using my wire table, and one side came out a little smoother than the other. Now the parts that matter of this are close to the end where the arch curves down. So that's what I want to pay the most attention to. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to glue this one down because it's the one I'm going to reference against for this, and I don't want it to be able to move while I'm referencing it. So all I'm going to do, this doesn't have to be awesome or perfect, it just needs to stick. So I'm going to take a piece of scrap paper and a glue stick, and I'm just going to get some glue on here. And try not to stick it to itself like that. Also, try not to catch it to where you're pulling towards it and it wrinkles real bad. We want this to be as smooth as possible on the material, on the foam. So we're gonna make sure we get around the edges especially well, hence the extra paper, because I don't want this glue on my mat. So we're just gonna run along there, just like so, get a couple extra smears of it along there. And we're just gonna do the same thing all the way around. And there's that. Okay, so the next thing to do is to get that crap out of the way. Find our spot. And one of the good things about using a glue stick is you have a little working time and it'll slide around on itself. So I did note that I need to be down towards the end. The most important thing to note is that I'm pulling the paper towards itself. I'm not pushing any of the paper other than to flatten it all out. So before I get too carried away, I want to make sure this actually fits. It does, so good to go. And now I'm just going to continue. See, that's what I'm trying to avoid, is creasing it. So we're just going to keep going bit by bit until it's all stuck down. And I took too long to get to this side, so my end over here isn't stuck flat. So what I'm gonna do is just pick it up, stick that in there, put it back down. And actually from here, you can try and do it this way. Sometimes this will hold, sometimes it won't. Doesn't look like I'm gonna get lucky, which means I've just made a mess that I have to work around. Because that's what I want. I want it flat like that. So we're just gonna peel this corner up and get more glue under it. Maybe I should have painted this on. Whatever, we'll figure it out. Right? That's what we do here on the channel. We figure it out. Okay, so that's pretty okay. It's a little messy. I'm a little tacky from glue, but it'll be all right. That should do just fine. Like my grandfather once told me, we're not trying to build the pyramids. We don't need it perfect. We just need it good enough. So what we're gonna do is check our lines here and try and make sure everything is lined up just as good as we can. And what can I use? I'm gonna use this and set that there. So that's still turned a little. It's okay. What we're gonna do next is just smear some of this on to these corners and line it back up. So we want that lined up like so, and then squish it into place and rub it down. So there's that. So those should hold for the moment. Again, they don't need to be 100% perfect. They just need to be good enough. So now we're gonna go from kind of here and work our way back. So let's get around to this edge. And a couple lines there across the middle to that edge, and we'll just push that down and squish it into place. And just give it a second to set. And just keep going. So you know what? Doing it that way is probably going to work better anyway. There we go. There. Now, recap that. And we are just going to let that sit and cure for a few minutes while I get the other piece of foam for my stairs ready. So I'm going to set this aside, do that off camera, and I will be back in a few minutes. I've got my... That's hard to get in frame. I've got my foam here with all of the template on it. And here I've got my hot wire, which is already going. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna start taking off some of the extra. So I'm just gonna push it in till I hit the paper and then back out, because I just wanna get it in there for the moment. And then I'm gonna come back here to this end and I'm gonna cut into the paper and then try to carefully cut along the paper and use the paper as a guide. So this isn't gonna be perfect, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because now what I wanna do is just go along there and just keep pushing until that. And then I'm just gonna thwack. Okay, so there you can see I sort of sped up and slowed down, and because I turned, it left a little bit of a divot in there, but that's okay, it'll be fine. Like I said, the end, none of this has to be exactly perfect, because we're gonna be texturing it after this anyway. So the next thing I wanna do is I'm gonna go ahead and try and take off all of that. So I'm gonna come back in here and get right down to the paper. and just keep going just like this. All right. There's definitely a spot there that I'm gonna have to fix, but that's okay. So let's get those out of the way. And I'm gonna do the rest of this and the stairs off camera. Okay, so I have used my hot wire to cut these to the shape I wanted. And then I've used my angle to stand them up on end and cut them vertically, because I could not find, for the life of me, 1/2-inch thick foam. So I'm just going to be substituting this 1-inch thick that I've ripped down to 1/2-inch thickness. And I've got 2 sets of stairs, so these will actually be set up something like this. And that will go across the roadbed. So the way these will sit up is the foam core that I'm using for the steps will sit between these, and we'll just barely be able to balance a model on them, mostly because there's a gap in between them for the base to slot into. And these will come up to here, and then the arch will go across. And I'm planning to magnetize the main body of the arch. That way, that way the main body of the arch goes all the way across, and you can take it off and pick it up. So what I'm probably gonna do is I'm gonna leave these as is. I will cut along that line. And then build the arch accordingly. Once I get started on the actual steps and get that figured out, then I'll know how exactly I want to cut this apart and magnetize it so that the actual span of the bridge comes out. So, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this here for now. And I will be back to work on this stuff when I get started building the stairs. The next thing I've got to do after getting the sides and everything of the bridge cut out is I need to do the arch that goes under here. And I think my goal is to cut this so there's a 1/2 inch or so there on the edges, and that will cover up this to a degree. And as I'm covering that up, I want to try and make the connecting space between the 2 arches as smooth as possible. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to score, like I've started here, I think this was every 1/8 of an inch? Yeah, every 1/8 of an inch. And as I'm doing that, that'll make, I'm not going all the way through, I'm being very careful, as I'll show here in a second. But my goal is to make it to where the foam is still there for structural support. It's just scored so it'll bend the cardstock without actually folding it. And my goal is to glue it into the top of the arch. I think I want it to go all the way down to probably this blue line on both sides, which I need to highlight on this side. So I need it to at least do this main archway, because I'm thinking at that span there, my goal is to have the top of the bridge come out on magnets. That'll make it easier to store. That'll make it more versatile, because then I can make like a collapsed bridge section that lays across the street and do some variation on that way. So that's where I'm at now. So with that, I'm gonna set those aside and show you how I've been doing these. So basically I'm finding where my last line was. And fortunately, this, I don't know what brand it is, but this ruler, the straight edge, has markings on it that are very solid every 1/8 of an inch. So I just slide the next one up into place. And the most important thing out of this is your X-Acto has to have a sharp point. So I've gone through making this project. I've gone through a couple of X-Actos already. So to score it, you just carefully come in here and you stab down through the top layer of cardstock and then just drag the blade along in a drawing motion. And you do the same thing at this side. You stab it through that top layer of cardstock and then you just continue until you feel that you're all the way through. This is a lot done by feel, and you're trying really hard not to go all the way through the second layer of cardstock at the bottom, but you want your cut through your foam, the actual core of the material. You want that to be as clean and as straight as possible, and you want it to go all the way from edge to edge. So this is a time-consuming, drawn-out process, unfortunately, and there's not really a good way to speed it up. But yeah, you want to just keep double-checking, make sure you're not going through the material, keep doing those lines, just like that. Like I said, this is time-consuming, but I think in the end it'll be pretty rewarding, and I'm trying to square up my lines as much as possible. None of this is going to be exactly perfect, and that is a-okay. It doesn't have to be. Obviously, the closer to perfect it is, the easier it is to get the smooth bend that we want, because it'll be all right angles and it'll try and bend equally across the entire surface. I am due for a new blade. I can feel the foam tearing instead of cutting. So these are still useful for other things, so I'm not throwing them out. I can use those to scrape off mold lines on models, for other cutting that doesn't require quite as much exactness as this, but I'm definitely trying not to tear the foam, because that'll also change how the foam folds and curves, how it bends. It can just, tearing it instead of cutting it will cause it to pull away from the cardstock, which will hamper the integrity of the structure, as well as affect how smooth that bottom bend will be on the cardstock. So anyway, I've got a fresh blade. I'm gonna just go ahead and do this. As you can see, this is like 17 inches worth of material that I have to cut every 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to be at this a while. So I'm going to do all of that off camera. There's no reason to sit here and watch me do it. And I'm going to do it somewhere else where I can do something else while I'm doing it. This is fucking mind-numbing. So let's recap with where we're at here. I've got my 2 main span arches carved. Did that on the foam cutting table. I have my steps, and I've got them all cut together as square as can be, because I need to cut them off even to this, because I didn't take into account on my template the 1/2 inch of the foam that they'd be abutted to. So 2 of these, or rather all 4 of them, need that cut off, and then 2 of them I'll also have to cut off a little lower, but I'll figure that out here in a little bit. So I have to cut these off on the foam table. That's where we're at on that. This is good, but the next thing I've got to do on this is I've scored this so it's all flexy and bendy, and this is just a normal piece of foam core. The main part of it that'll go in between the 2 side rails, I have stripped off the edges of the foam and everything. One layer of the cardstock, the foam in between, and then I've just left the cardstock on the other side. And then on the front side, I've left the cardstock in place and just scored it around every 1/8 of an inch. And the reason I did that is so it'd make it flexible but still solid. And as you can see, this fits in like so, in between both of the bridge halves. It just needs glued in and squared up and straightened out, but for the most part, that is the structural part of my bridge. Like I said, it still needs secured, it needs glued. I need to figure out exactly what height I'm going to cut across at on both sides so the span itself comes off, because I want to do that for storage, transport, and versatility, because I think I may make a second just top portion of the bridge. So if I want to remove it and have it ruined, or maybe do a special campaign thing where the goal is to destroy a bridge, I'd have to do some other work to prep for that, but I think it's kind of a fun idea, and I may go ahead and tinker with some concepts for how to use this in a different way. I may also make a few different varieties of this bridge. I may take and make one that's a street version. Like, this is only wide enough for a footpath. It's supposed to be roughly 2 inches between the two halves. So obviously, models will fit in between, but like full-on vehicles won't. So I may need to remake one that could be used for streets. So yeah, I need to cut all this off, square them up, even them out so they'll fit on there as desired, but I've got them all taped together for that. Next up, I have both of the bases done. So these are going to go on either side of the 8 inches, and then the bridges themselves will sit like so, with about that much space in between them, and they'll be offset, so the stairs on either side will go up, and they'll be offset slightly. So there's that. These are completely untouched. They're just 2-inch bands or strips that I've cut that will eventually be the actual span of the bridge, the steps that go up the last bit to it. And then I have also cut up the 2 2-inch platforms that will go on either side, like the landings that lead up to the main span, and then the steps that will go at the sides up that'll be in between the banisters. So I've got most of the steps made up, complete with detailed texturing, same with the platforms, same with the bases, although I think I need to go through and weather the bases a little more, add some more cracks and breaking to them. I initially left them really plain, but after getting into it and thinking about the narrative for the piece, I did the steps and the bridge itself a lot more textured and weathered, so I'm probably going to go back and add some cracks to this as well. So yeah, next thing to do, I think, is to square these up, and I will do that off camera just because my foam cutting table isn't very conducive to doing straight edges on this desk. So that's going to be what I do next. Then I'm probably going to, off camera as well, cut these to length and texture them and have them ready to go. So I'll probably do a bunch of this off camera just because this is tedious. You guys have seen me do concrete in its own special video, as well as in other projects, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I will probably come back on when I'm actually starting to assemble the whole thing. So after taking my measurements and marking my foam, I know where I need to cut out for these to sit, and I've been stewing on it for a day or two now. And let's turn it around so you guys can see it on both cameras here. So as you can see, I've got the foam marked with Sharpie, and in general I'm going to want to cut on the outside of both of these marks, except for this one. This one I want to cut on this side, not this side. So the reason for that is where I want the overlap to be, and this in the end will be on the front of this. So I'm also going to, once I get this cut, make the same cuts on this for that part all the way across the span. And the reason for that is that'll make it so the whole thing comes off and I can magnetize it. The downside to that is I'm also going to have to cut through my foam core that I've got on here, which means I'll have to cut through the glue and everything. So the reason for that is, I'm making the span modular or magnetized so it'll come off. And actually I probably ought to just go ahead and mark this. But so let's go ahead and do that actually. So we've got our steps in place pretty close. This isn't going to need to be 100% perfectly accurate. It just needs to be close. So I've got this. I'm going to grab my Sharpie here and make my mark. So again, I'm going to want to cut on the outside of this mark, the top of it. And I'm going to need a pen or something to make that last mark. So it's okay. I should be able to rationally mark it out from there. And then I want to do the same thing on this end. So I'm going to start by getting this in place. Put my ruler down to where it touches the top on both sides. Get that straightened out. That ought to be pretty well good enough. And then yeah, we're just gonna mark right along there and all the way out to mark. So, all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and take care of the next step of cutting all this apart off camera. I will be back in a minute. I've got these cut apart now, and the rest of it should be, relatively speaking, the easy part. So this needs to get glued to this. Fortunately, I already have the shape in mind, so I just need to pin or clamp that in place. I think I'm going to use PVA because I don't need to work with this for quite a while, and I want to be able to adjust it and fine-tune it and make sure it fits right. So I have noticed that they aren't perfect. This isn't square on this end, and I'm not going to try and force it. So what I need to do next is mark which end is which, and I need to finish cutting out those parts. So I need to finish cutting these out and gluing the stairwells in and cutting the side off of this stairwell. I need to finish making the other stairwell, which I will also do off camera, because really that's not that exciting to see once you see how I've got it lined up. I did have to make an adjustment because I miscalculated when I trimmed these flush. I ended up taking off about 1/8 of an inch or so that I had originally had planned to factor in for that bottom step, so they would all be within the confines of the rails, the sides. But it's not a big deal that they're not. It'll just let models sit on that bottom step and be a little more exposed, which for S.E.E.R and most other games won't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and get these glued together, and then I'm going to get to work on the other side and get it glued together and pinned in place and make the other set of stairs. So that's where I'm at next. Let's go ahead and get this cut apart. I am ready to attach the other side of the span to the magnets and the strips that they're attached to. So the way I did that is, instead of using chalk or anything, I'm just gonna, or paint or whatever, just gonna line these up where I know I want them and then squish it down on there. And there you can see it leaves marks. See if I can, hopefully you can see the indentations that it's left. And then once those are in there, the next thing I do is I get out my hobby knife, which keeps running away. Get out my hobby knife and just go around the indent. And the reason I go around larger than the indent, let's see if I can hold this at an angle where you can see what I mean. So as I go around, I'm leaving about a millimeter gap for there to be just a little bit of play and for the magnet to fit down into. So on the end here where it's thinnest, I'm being careful not to go all the way through, and then I'll come back in at an angle and cut out slices of the foam, because I want to make it to where it is deep enough. There we go. For the magnet to fit down into. Almost there. There we go. All right, and then yeah, that should be good. So I'm going to do that on all four sides where the magnet's supposed to be. So just going to go through and do that real quick with this held up out of the way. The next thing to do is to put glue all over all of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is fill up those holes and run a bead of glue along the edges. All right. And use my spreader. Actually, I'm going to cut this off before I get much farther so it's not in the way. The next step takes a little bit of space, so it was inconvenient to say the least, and I should have done this differently. So bear with me as there we go, cut that off. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm just gonna get this set in place and make little adjustments until it squishes down onto where it's supposed to be. Yeah, that's in the way, so we're just gonna get rid of it for now. Okay, so now I need to secure this whole thing so it'll actually cure where I want it. So I'm gonna put that there and put these across the top. These are going to be what gets me started. I need a little bit smaller rubber band. So I'm going to go there and around and then back over, push this up, and I'm going to do same thing on the other side. Push them down some. All right, that's my start. I want to keep as much pressure on that as I can there, and I'm going to do the same thing here at the back, but I need to do another one there. So this part actually goes really long, so I'm going to put a couple of these there, and I'm going to go from there to there with a couple of rubber bands to put good pressure on it. Get it on both sides just like the others. Go from there to there and push it down some. All right, so now that that one's in place, I can take a couple more of these, put them towards the back of this because I want this held down all the way across. So put this down, and we're gonna whoop. All Right, and then same thing, hit it there, go around the top. And I want these solid enough that they take a couple rubber bands to hold where I want them. There we go. As it gets clamped into place more, you'll see more and more glue come out the edges, and that's exactly what we're going for here. So get that out of the way. The next thing to do is this back corner, which is a little more difficult. So we're going to do it at an angle, which I had to pin the other side with T-pins, the push pins, to get it to stay in place. So I'm probably going to have to do the same thing on this side, but that's okay. It's just part of it. So there's that, and get that one over there and over there. Get it pushed down a little closer. Yeah, okay, well, yep, gonna take some T-pins to this one too, so. Okay, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the process so far. As you can see, I've got a little more work to do as far as construction goes. I have, like I said in the beginning, the rest of the supports that come up the side of the actual span left to do, and I'm gonna do a little bit of trim work around the top of these to kind of hide that gap between the magnets and the stairs. And then I've got a couple more places where I'm gonna do basically that. I'm just gonna hide a few mistakes kind of underneath trim to sort of cover them up and blend them in without being too conspicuous. It should look like one solid, really nice piece when I'm finished. So that's what's next for this. That'll probably be next week's video because I've still got painting, I've still got to finish the construction, and this is going to be a little bit different of a paint scheme than the concrete and other stuff I've been painting. So I think that's worth documenting. So with that in mind, that's the next video coming up. I'm just gonna knock this out over the course of the next week. Then it's a toss-up between what'll be coming up after that. I've got a couple things in mind. Of course, we have to finish the transit hub. My 3D printer, I'm apparently bad at that hobby. What are you gonna do? Sometimes it goes like that. It takes practice, time, there's a learning curve. Still learning. Definitely not a professional, which is why I haven't made a video on it. I feel like that's not really, I'm not good at it. Why would I want to spread misinformation? So with that in mind, that's going to be a video coming up where I finish up the transit hub. I still need to print out a window frame and a few interior details. I've got some bottles and stuff, magazine rack envisioned, so I'm probably going to do that. I've got all the parts to fix the printer. Should be able to do it sometime soon. So we'll see on that. Other than that, I have a big project coming up starting this week. We have company coming in. And so on that period, I've enlisted my friend to help me build some buildings and actually be a part of the video process. Him and Callie are going to participate in actually knocking out a handful of buildings in a hurry. So be sure to come back and check that out. I'm not sure which video will be next. I'm probably going to end up shooting a lot of footage for the batch build, so that's probably going to take some time to edit. So next week's will probably be the bridge, then the transit hub, and then the batch build of buildings. And I've got some ideas for how I'm gonna do a bunch of those at once. So be sure to come back and check those out. Hit the bell notification so you'll see when those go live. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and comment so more people see these. Share them to your friends, especially in the mini community, because I know tons of people will love this stuff. They just need to see it, and that helps spread the word. Spread what you love to your friends. So lastly, if you like this and you like what we're doing, be sure to support us by checking out our Patreon. This month's campaign mission is another solo mission. I'm kind of using that as an opportunity to test out and write out some solo play rules. Also, you can come check us out on Buy Me a Coffee. Definitely throw us some coffee money for Callie so I can make it up to her for participating in the craziness. I can't express how much that would mean. So thank you guys very much again. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And remember, at the Clock Tower, it's always game time.
I got a taco. I got a taco. I got a taco. Hey, 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 hey.